Our scripture this morning is from the Gospel according to John, chapter 1, verses 35 through 51. The next day, John was there again with two of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, "What do you want?" They said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" "Come," he replied, "and you will see." So they went and saw where he was staying, and they spent the day with him. It was about 4 p.m. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We have found the Messiah, that is, the Christ," and he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which, when translated, is Peter. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." "Nazareth? Can anything good come from there?" Nathanael asked. "Come and see," said Philip. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said of him, "Here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." "How do you know me?" Nathanael asked. Jesus answered, "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you." Then Nathanael declared, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus said, "You believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that." He then added, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." May the Lord bless the reading and the hearing of his word.
So this past week, I was in Florida. Don't hate me. I know it was cold up here. There's a ministry conference that Tracy and I went to down in Orlando. We actually flew out Sunday night. Had to de-ice the plane as the hard snow was coming down. But one of the nice things that happened was my daughter, because she's not going back to college yet, I said, "Hey, I'm going to be at this ministry conference. We'll be in Florida. You want to come with?" And so Margaret kind of went with me, and I had this great time with my college-age daughter, and got to talk about a lot of things. So our last day, one of the things we talked about was we were talking about a mutual friend, and she kind of said, he posts all this great stuff. He's a great influencer, and she said that when she said that to him, that he was an influencer, he said, "Well, I'm not really an influencer. I don't have that many followers." And I just got in this conversation around, because I don't really use a whole lot of social media. Like, well, how many followers do you have to have in order to be an influencer? And then Margaret said, "Well, I'm not an influencer. I have 800 followers, and 800 to me sounded like a lot." But she was like, "No, that's nothing." And then she said, "You don't want to know how many people I follow." And I was like, "Now I have to know." And she showed me, it was like 1,300 people that she followed. I was like, "How do you follow 1,300 people?" So she was just showing me all this stuff. And so I thought, it might be interesting just in today's world. I looked it up, to see the people who have the biggest influence, who have the most followers on X and on Instagram. And so anyways, here's the list. Here's the top 9 on X. At the top, you have NASA, which is the only non-person on this list. Taylor Swift, Donald Trump. Those 3 are just south of 100 million followers. I think Taylor Swift's at 94 million, Donald Trump's at 95. Below that, you have some people who are over 100 million. You have Katy Perry, Rihanna, and Justin Bieber, just over 100 million followers each. And then the 3 big ones are next. You have Cristiano Ronaldo, Barack Obama, and Elon Musk, who tops out at 210 million followers on X. And then I go into, well, let's see what it looks like on Instagram. And Instagram, the numbers are even more bonkers. So these are top 7. You'll see the 7th one next. So the top 3, Kim Kardashian, Ariana Grande, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, they're just south of 400 million followers. And just over 400 million, you have Kylie Jenner, Selena Gomez, and Lionel Messi. And then the number 1 Instagram influencer in the world is Cristiano Ronaldo, the only one who appeared on both X and Instagram. He has over 637 million followers just on Instagram. So you combine with X, he has over 800 million followers. Isn't that crazy? That many followers. So anyways, I was thinking about that in comparison to our scripture, which we just heard, because follower clearly in today's world means something entirely different than what it meant in Jesus's day and time. Because the technology didn't exist in Jesus's day and time for someone to share their life, to share their opinions en masse, to everyone. Instead, if you wanted to know someone and what they were doing and where they were going, you had to literally, physically follow them. And there was a particular name in the Bible for a follower. It's a disciple. That's what the word disciple means. It's just a follower. And you could be a follower of John the Baptist. You could be a follower of Jesus. You could be a follower of any particular teacher or rabbi. And here's the key. This is, I think, what separates, Instagram and X following from Jesus's following. I was looking at the engagement rate of these things, like on X and Insta, like most of those people I showed, they have an engagement rate of less than 1%. And engagement rate just means that someone likes, interacts, likes the post, reposts it, shares it with their neighbors or friends. Like there's very low engagement. But in biblical discipleship, it's super high engagement, because a disciple wasn't just someone who followed, it was someone who was an apprentice, who was learning to be like their master. And so in Jesus' day and time, there were crowds who followed him wherever he went. People who wanted to hear what he had to say, people who wanted to witness a miracle. There were thousands of people who followed Jesus. But there were only 12 that were invited to become disciples, who wouldn't just know him, but he would know them. A reciprocal relationship would happen, and they would sit at his feet, and they would learn from him. They have opportunity to ask questions. And yes, the disciples got it wrong a lot when you read through the Gospels. And yet, what they did right is they followed. They answered the call. And they went wherever, and they learned from him. So for this year, 2025, I'm wanting to make it the year of discipleship in our church. I've been thinking and praying about this, and after all that we've gone through as in 2024, with just the heavy topics that we worked our way through, and it was all important work for us to do as a church. But I want to pull us back as a church just to the simple concept of following Jesus in our daily lives. How do we do that well as individuals and as a church? So this is our year of discipleship. And it's funny, even before I kind of reached this point in my spirit while I was ready to kind of make that declaration, some work was taking place in the background, because last summer, Ashley kind of came to me and said, we don't really have a discipleship leadership team in our church. We used to way back in the day, but it kind of fallen apart. And she wanted to take this on. And so she began inviting some leaders into conversation with her and with one another around, what does discipleship look like in our church? And how can we create more opportunities for people to connect and grow in faith? And so this work has been taking place. I'm now declaring this is what I want to be our focus and our goal for the coming year. And I'm going to invite forward 2 of the chairs, the people who agreed to kind of lead this team that Ashley had formed, Erica Lewis and Jesse Kurth, who are going to share with us a little bit about discipleship and about some of the goals and plans we have for the church. So come on up here, guys. Here you go. Oh, she's getting mics. I thought she was going to get her. I thought, Erica, you were being like, I can get my own chair. Thank you. Because that's who I'm married to. Like, Jamila would not let me, like, it. I remember, so this is a little side story. We're just going to be off the cuff here for a little bit. When Jamila and I were first ordained, we had to appear in front of the whole body of all the clergy in the southern Indiana, which is 200, 300 people, similar crowd to this. And we had to introduce ourselves as we went down the line to all these clergy, right? And I was in front of Jamelin. And so, like, we were told, like, every person that was going, we were at the end of the line, every person went before, like, they introduced themselves, and then they said a little bit about their family. Like, I'm married to so-and-so, we have so-and-so children, that kind of thing. So it got to me, and I said, hi, my name's David Williamson. I'm married to Jamelin. And Jamelin stopped me and goes, I can introduce myself. Thank you. Like, so I thought you were doing one of those, like, I got my own chair days.
I can't get my own chair, but I appreciate the fact you got it for me.
Well, so speaking of introductions, why don't you guys begin just by introducing yourselves to the church? I'm sure not everyone knows who you are, and tell a little bit about your history in this church, but also, like, just your own path with God. So
I guess I'll go first. My name is Jesse Kurth, and my wife Noelle and our daughter Hanley and our son Lane. We've been attending here for a couple of years now, and having moved to Zionsville kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, and been looking for a church home for a while. So it's been wonderful to be here, and we were really excited to participate. I was excited to participate and be invited on the discipleship team here because it's an important topic for me. And as a newcomer to this church body, I've been navigating what are the programs here? How can I become engaged? What does it look like to be a member of this community? And it felt like a really cool opportunity to at least bring some ideas to the table and to learn on a fast track what it's like to be engaged here.
My name's Erica Lewis. My husband Greg and I have raised our kids in this church. We joined in August of 2002 when we had first moved here. So we are going on our 23rd year as members of the church, which means that Greg and I actually joined when we were 10. For everybody's keeping track. Thanks. But I got involved in the discipleship team because I was having a conversation when we went to the Colossian Forum training last spring. I was having a conversation with Ashleah and said, I want to be involved in things that have an impact. I want to make a difference. I want to do something that has meaning. That's how I want to spend my time, in my youth. And Ashleah looked at me. She goes, have I got something for you?
So be careful what you say to us pastors.
Exactly. But it's been a fabulous journey that we've been on, and this is a great group of people to be working with.
And it's interesting because you've been here a couple of years, 23 years, and yet your faith story is almost the opposite dynamics, right?
It is. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. So I was raised in the church. I was raised Lutheran, actually. Should have here at a Methodist church. I had no idea we were going to find. You're raised in a specific denomination, and then our faith journey took us through a lot of non-denominational churches, and again, moving post-pandemic, it was what's our church home going to be, and you just never know what to expect when you walk into a church. But having grown up with my dad being in ministry, church was kind of always a second home for me. In the summer when there's no school, Dad's got to go to work, and we don't want to be stuck at home. We go and play around at the church. And so it was always a very comfortable space. I was raised in faith and to have faith, but a lot was handed to me, and it's taken me a long time over the course of my adult years to discover a faith for myself, longer than I realized it would take and for it to mature. And along the way, I remember I've had a lot of experiences of being jealous of those who came into faith from outside of it and had, big transformative stories to say, my life was this way and now it's not. And now it's something different and maybe more beautiful in certain ways. And I've had to discover that in almost piecemeal over a long time.
Yeah, and honestly, I didn't grow up in a family where we went to church. I think that my entire family were believers, but we didn't attend. And so growing up, I attended with friends, but I was always a guest. And so when you grow up feeling like you're a guest at church, you're a little slower to, I think, maybe adopt your faith fully. And so I actually became a part of the church as an adult. And so, yeah, Jesse and I couldn't be more opposite of any two people, which I think is probably why this works.
Yeah. And so so you each obviously have different faith journeys, and we're talking about discipleship, and which is kind of also about your faith journey. I guess I want to start with, like, discipleship is kind of like this churchy word, right? Like, you only use it in the context of the church. If you get out, like, you don't say it at a corporate meeting, like, or when you're like a neighborhood party. How's your discipleship going? Unless you really just want to get out of a conversation, because it's a good way to, like. My favorite like meme that I post is of Homer Simpson disappearing into, like, the shrubs, and that's, like, I feel like you bring up discipleship, that's what most people do in the conversation, is like, whoop, I'm backing out of here. So what is, like, to you guys, what does discipleship mean? Put it in everyday terms.
I think in its simplest definition, it is just following Jesus and trying to pattern your life after his example and to try to be more like him.
Yeah. And in the example that Jesus gave, the model that he gave, for me, I find that discipleship is it's an interplay between the internal and the external. He would frequently retreat and be off by himself. He would take alone time, just kind of disappear. I think nobody knew where he was for hours or days at a time, and then reemerge. And I think he would take what he found, the depth and the connection and the true self that he had space to be intimate with, out into the world. He had something to bring, and then whether it's motive or engaging with people, healing and miraculous signs or everyday conversations, he was coming from that rooted, connected place.
So for you, discipleship's kind of a both being with God and being with others.
Yes.
Yeah. When we talked about this in preparation, the first time I asked that question, what is discipleship? We actually took a long time to nail down what it was, because the first thing we thought of is all the things that discipleship is not. And so we're going to tick through some of the things that we would just want to say discipleship is not. And I don't know if you want to go first, Erica.
Well, one of the first things I said is that discipleship is not a straight line. It is not a step-by-step process. You don't check off boxes and say, okay, I have successfully completed phase 1. I get to move into phase 2. It just doesn't look that way. That's not how our lives work. And so it's a very serpentine. The path is a little bit forward, a lot backward, some sideways, and it has so many different components to it that if you're trying to look at it and say, being a full disciple is step 16 and I'm only on step 2, then you'll never make it to 16 if that's how you're looking at it. So it is just a little bit of a lot of things, and you're going to step around and step in and step out.
Yeah, we were talking a lot earlier about how we really like to have structured lives. We like to set a path and walk it. And
these are my goals for 2025.
Yeah.
And
we're progressing. And those are good things. You want to end up somewhere in life on purpose. You want to say, I want to be here at some point. And so they can give you direction. But there's a certain degree of peace that comes from knowing that life has twists and turns. It has interruptions. It has unexpected disruptions. Sometimes a grenade goes off in the middle of your life. And to know that doesn't mean your discipleship not only has space for all of that, sometimes that's the discipleship journey that you didn't know you were meant to be on. And it's just going where life takes you doesn't mean it's taking you away from your discipleship journey. It's always with you.
That may be where God's leading you to. Like I really resonate with this, like, because I find a lot of times in different stages of my life, I keep coming back to some of the same questions and the same problems over and over again. And when I step in it, which that conjures different images for me when you say step in it. But when I step into that moment, I'm like, I recognize like this question, this feeling. It's wearing a different garb, but it's the same thing I keep circling back on. And on the one hand, I get frustrated, like, haven't I figured this? Like, can't I learn this by now? But I also take some knowledge of grace that, like, oh, I've been here before, and I know God is with me, and He's going to lead me through it. So
He's probably telling you in that moment, there's still a little bit more to this that we need to work on together.
Right.
So,
yeah,
please,
is growth.
my world.
Yeah.
Yeah. You take the next one.
Can we put it up on? Because
Just up there on the yeah. There you go.
Oh, okay, great. There's no prerequisite or pre-qualification required in order to walk in discipleship. You don't have to have done anything right before to simply respond to the invitation, whatever's next. I was getting into this a little bit in some of my last comments, but it's always right next to you. You don't have to get somewhere else to become a disciple. We see this in the way that Jesus invited people from all walks of life. You mentioned tax collectors to fishermen. It is exactly wherever they were in the moment that Jesus showed up and said, hey, follow me. There was no specific change they had to make in advance or to access discipleship. It's always immediately next to you. It could be an internal thing that God in a still small voice is inviting you to surrender or question or think about or read about. It could be an external thing, a conversation that you want to have or that you don't want to have. But you don't have to go somewhere other than where you are to take your next step as a disciple.
And you don't have to be a spiritual giant. You know, like, I think sometimes you feel like this gets to the one I know you want to talk about next, which is like you feel like you have to have it all together to be a disciple. No, even in the mess, like you can still follow wherever you are, even when things have fallen apart. Which I know that's what you want to talk about. Like, you don't have to be perfect.
Well, and discipleship is not a comparative process. So I think probably if I asked you guys to picture in your mind who you think is a modern current day disciple, we all have different people that we know whose picture will pop up in our minds, but it's not a comparative process. We're not comparing ourselves to where that person is, or I'm not comparing myself to where you are, or Jesse, where you are, because that's destructive. And discipleship is never destructive. When you're comparing yourself to somebody else, you are either tearing yourself down because you're looking at yourself saying, I'm not as far along in this journey as this person. Or you say, hey, I'm doing pretty well because compared to this person, look at me. And you just tore that person down. So discipleship is never destructive. It's always constructive. And we're all moving forward from wherever we are at that moment.
Yeah. And I mean, I've used this phrase a couple times in sermons, but it was a phrase that a mentor gave me, like when I was first starting in ministry. It was so helpful to me that I was a chaplain in a hospital, and I was saying how I just felt so unsure. And like, it just felt like all the nurses and doctors, they knew exactly what they were doing. And I felt so unsure of myself. And this mentor kind of said to me, she said, Dave, you're comparing your insides to their outsides. Like, because that's all you see is that put together person self. And they now on the inside might just be as unsure as you are. And then they're probably in the same way comparing themselves to you, and all they see is the outside. They don't see kind of the doubt and insecurity that you're carrying. And so like, I know I repeat that phrase a lot. I repeat it to my kids a lot, especially my daughter going off to college. You're like, hey, when you're comparing, like everyone else looks like if they have it together, like you're You're just comparing your insides to their outsides. But I think when it comes to discipling comparative process, God is not working with the surface on any of us. God is always working on the inside, and we don't know what God's doing in anyone else's heart. We just have to we have to be open and attentive to what God's doing with us. Yeah. So mine that I thought of is discipleship is not a solo journey. Like, I think sometimes we think about Jesus, like our disciples is just me and Jesus, right? And yet when Jesus invited disciples to follow him, he was also inviting them into a community of other people who were following him. And when you look at, you said this earlier with the disciples, they were from all walks of life, and some of them held very different views. Like, you had a tax collector on one side and you had a zealot on the other end, which were like opposite ends of like the political spectrum. And yet they were called into community because in that community they would experience life and transformation. And so, like, when I think about discipleship, there is a personal part. It is personal, but it's not necessarily private. Like, we are meant to share our discipleship with others. And I think for each of us, we need some people in our lives with whom we can be real and authentic, where that external side that I was just talking about is we drop that and people know what's really going on in our hearts. And if we don't have people in our lives who know what's going on in our hearts, then chances are that we're also taking that posture with God too. Like, we're putting on a show for God instead of really being real and allowing God to work what's going on in us. And so I think we all need community with us to help us be real.
Yeah, and I think that's I lean heavily on retreat and solitude for listening to God's voice, but I think,
And big shock, I'm more about community.
yes. And if I were to simply pursue God's voice by myself, I would miss hearing what God has to say through the voices of the people around me. And I think God shares a lot about whether it's a nudge or an invitation or just opening our eyes to a truth that we need for our hearts. So much of God's voice comes through the community that we're involved in too.
Wow.
I think it's that. Yeah, you can go right ahead. Okay. Discipleship. This might be the last thing that we decided discipleship is not. We should be talking about. It's not a compulsion. There's no outside force that can compel you to take the next step as a disciple, to make the next choice in light of who Christ is inviting you to be your whole, true, full self in the world in that next way, or to retreat in a way that you might need to recenter. Nobody can force you to do that. It's kind of like force feeding. No matter how delicious the food is, if someone forces it upon you, it's not going to be the experience it was designed to be that the chef set out.
But when he said that phrase, force feeding, it made me remember when I was a kid and my grandmother tried to force feed me eggplant, and did a thing where no one's leaving the table until you eat this, Dave. And I literally couldn't swallow it. And when I tried, then I threw up over the whole table, and you have a similar.
Yeah, I used to get the timer. My dad would set the timer and I couldn't leave the table, and I had a similar issue with mushrooms and onions. So you'll never see me with a mushroom pizza.
And so it's not that eggplant's bad or mushrooms and onions bad, but sometimes we think, sometimes I think discipleship feels that way to people. It's eggplant,
vegetables, yeah.
It's mushrooms and onions, good for me, but I hate it, but it's not.
No, I think there's for every one of us, and it's probably different for everyone, there's something delicious on that table that you're invited to partake in. And I see discipleship as this gorgeous, beautiful, immaculate spread that the Lord has sitting out for you. And you might not reach for the same dish that other people are reaching for, and nobody can force you to reach or partake. But that meal is always available. It's always right in front of you. It's always offered. And it's always just an invitation. Come and partake what is good for your soul.
Yeah. Well, so let's get a little practical with this. We talked about discipleship in broad terms. You guys have been doing work on the discipleship team. So I'm going to do two pieces to this question. So first, for the whole church, like, what does this look like? All this stuff we're talking about with discipleship. How could someone like take a next step and in their own journey, here in 2025? And then secondly, the secondary question is I want to ask you for your own selves, like, what's a moment in your life where discipleship has been real and made a real important difference in your life? But first, start with a church question that you guys have been working, planning. What does this look like in 2025? How could someone take a next step?
Yeah, we've been reviewing, what is the collection of programs and ministries that are offered? Are there gaps we could fill? Are there things so first of all, I just want to say, we want to hear from you. You're kind of passing in and out and around the community and saying, gosh, I wish I could learn more about this, or I wish I had an opportunity to engage this way, or discuss this topic with people who also are concerned about that the same way I am. We would love to hear about those things so that we can take that input and create community space for each maybe flavor at the table of discipleship, that, not to torture that analogy. But there are some specific things that are coming up on offer here, winter, spring, starting February 9th at the 11 o'clock service. We're going to have a couple of programs similar to things that we have been doing on Wednesday evenings last semester. We're organizing this into semesters to keep ourselves sane. It's starting February 9th at the 11 o'clock time slot. If you're interested, we'll be offering a class and discussion time on world religions. So how is it that other people who are pursuing faith life do that, and through their lens that is different from Christianity? And then also, many of you may be familiar with the TV series, The Chosen. We'll be walking through season 1 of The Chosen, and it's particularly poignant for this conversation because it imagines the experience of people from every walk of life invited to follow Christ, and what it looked like for them, what it could have looked like for them.
Right. Yeah.
And there's going to be more to come on the entire discipleship program that we're putting together, but it has a lot of different elements to it. So it's not just coming to church and sitting in worship service, and it's not just taking a class, and it's, there's lots of different ways to be involved. Come to pickleball on Mondays and Thursdays for co-ed, and Wednesdays for the ladies. There's lots of different ways. Some of it's playing, some of it's worship, some of it's studying, some of it's just being in community with each other, some of it's missions. So there's going to be a lot more that you're going to hear about this in the coming months. But if there is something that you're interested in being involved in, please talk to us. Or if there's something, hey, I think this would be great for us to explore, please let us know. And we're super interested in hearing about all the things that you guys are interested in taking part in. So we'll include that in our studies and what we're putting together.
And so there's 2 classes we're starting February 9th. If someone were interested in them, what would they do today?
Right out at the little welcome table in the back and the right of the lobby, we've just got a couple of simple handwritten sign-up sheets. Hey, I think I'd like to use my 11 o'clock hour on Sundays. Again, from February through not quite Easter, and there's an interruption for spring break, and we've got Confirmation Sunday, one of those weeks that's a 10 o'clock service, so there will be some off weekends, but just put your name and email address on there, and we'll make sure you have the details.
Okay.
And also, by the way, speaking of prerequisites, there aren't any for these. So the Chosen format is watching clips from the show and then discussing it. And the World Religion class is watching a video from Adam Hamilton and then discussing that. So it's very easy. You can pop in and out anytime.
None of us need more homework.
No.
Yeah. No. Well, then move to the personal. Maybe if you could each just share a space or a time where discipleship rose to a place of importance in your own life.
I think for me, it was probably the most defining moment was when we had our kids. And so, when you have young ones and you're looking at gee, what kind of a parent do I want to be? And what are the elements to our family life that are important to us? And our faith was very important to us. And we wanted to raise our kids in faith and kind of help them along their discipleship journey. And by the way, our kids are way better than we are. And I shouldn't compare. I just said that it's a bad thing. But I'm just telling you, our kids, we outkicked our coverage with our children. But at any rate, I think that's really that point in my life when I said, hey, this is very formative for who I am and who I want to be. And that's when I jumped in with both feet.
Yeah, I've been through seasons where I felt like my kids were outgrowing me, and I needed to do something about that if I was going to be a valuable parent to them. Discipleship has become, I happen to be in a very relevant season of discipleship right now. I lost my job in November. It was time, all the right reasons, doesn't make it any easier. But I've been kind of like a forced sabbatical season over the past couple of months. Starting some new work here probably next week, but it was a season of, again, with my preference for a retreat, reflection and centering and grounding in ways that I think prior versions of myself would have really had my identity shaken by, oh, well, hold on, if I'm not being a professional of this in my job and whatever, then who am I? And it's given me this beautiful context to be more grounded and centered in who I really am than I maybe have ever had the opportunity to do before. So it's been it's a very active season for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for sharing. Can you guys join me in just thanking them for their not just for the work you've been doing for 6 months plus, but for your testimony. So let me just share my little bit here. I was at this conference last week, and one of my favorite speakers is a guy named Rich Velotis, who was speaking at the conference, and I really wanted to hear him. And he said this thing that hit me. He said, there's a huge difference between being in the world for God versus being in God for the world. And he was talking about our relationship with God, obviously, and it occurred to me in that moment, as he was talking about it, I was like, I feel like I'm in the world for God, I'm leading a church and trying to do good things, but I often let my relationship with God suffer.
You were getting your check boxes, weren't you?
Yeah, I'm checking the boxes, and on the outside everything looks great, but on the inside I'm dry, I'm tired, and I'm worn out, and I'm not refueling myself in prayer, and so for me, when I think about discipleship, it's about relationship. It's about being in a relationship with God, and back to Rich Velotis, he quoted Matthew 7, one of Jesus' parables that he tells about he says, the kingdom of heaven is like this party, and there's gates, and there are people on the outside of the gates who are clamoring to get in, and they say, look at all the good things we've done. We've performed wonders, we've cast out evil spirits, we've healed people, and Jesus replies to them and says, depart from me, I don't know you. And Rich just made the point, doing the work of God is not the equivalent to knowing God, being in relationship. And that's where I so easily slip, is I feel like I'm, and I point all those check marks. Well, look, I did this. I'm following you, God, but it's not the same. I know you're not. You haven't been in relationship with me. You haven't let me deal with the inside stuff. You're just playing a role. And so for me, I think about going back to where I started was, all those followers, all those celebrity followers, right? Like, that's the thing about following in today's world. You can follow someone and not know them at all, and them not know you. It's so impersonal. But discipleship was not like that. It was, you got to know Jesus, and he got to know you. And I find it so interesting that when Jesus, when the first disciples came to him and said, Rabbi, where are you staying? His response was that he didn't answer their question. He actually just said, well, come and see. It was an invitation to follow. Like, he could have answered, but he's like, I'm not going to answer the question. I just want you to follow me, and you'll have more questions after that, but come and see. And the word see there is not like be a spectator. Like, we can come to worship and you can be a spectator. You can volunteer, as an usher or greeter or music leader. You can be a spectator. You can be a pastor and be a spectator, watching what's going on in other people's lives, not letting it happen for you. It's when Jesus says come and see, what he really means is come and know who I am and discover me. And that's the invitation for all of us. Not come and be spectators, but come and see, go into a deeper relationship with God. And that's what I hope will be a goal for every single one of us in the coming year. Just to know God better and to see his work in our lives. So we're going to close worship with a song. As Kiki comes to, let me just lead us in a prayer. God, thank you for this time of worship. Thank you for Jesse and for Erica and for their testimony. And I pray, God, that you take whatever was said up here. Maybe we all heard a different part, but the part that we needed to hear, may your Spirit cause that seed to grow and bloom in our lives so that we might follow you more deeply, so that we might know you more deeply and that you might know us. And help us, God, to be real and authentic with you so that we might know in our deepest heart of hearts how good you are and how much we can trust you. All this we pray in Christ's name. Amen.